Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 4 buy low trade targets for the 2023 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about 6 prospects who have not lived up to their overall expectations thus far this season, and quite frankly, that's the point. We want to go after players that we know have incredibly high upside and have demonstrated that in seasons past. Go after them because they're associated with teams in your league that are struggling, perhaps have a 1-2 or 0-3 record. Trade for them because once, in fact, these players find their footing in 2023, we want it to be for our teams so that they can help us capture a 2023 fantasy football championship. So I'll go ahead, give you guys my thought process and opinions regarding these 6 prospects at the running back and wide receiver positions, present statistics that, of course, justify the reasons as to why we want to trade them. And I'll also be mentioning some potential options in terms of players that you might want to go ahead and sell high at this current moment in time, because even though we have seen some of these prospects that have come out of nowhere find incredible success, we have seen this in seasons past where players will catch fire early and we might want to go ahead and sell them hot before they cool off and kill our fantasy teams in the future. Now, before we get into the content, a reminder for those of you who have yet to do so, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Again, we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the season with the singular purpose of trying to help you guys win a fantasy football championship. Couple reminders: tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I'll be here live streaming for 2 hours, and then additionally on Saturday morning, I'll be live streaming for 4 hours from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, answering questions. Of course, I want to make sure that I'm live before the London game that starts at 6:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time so that we have all those rosters aligned. And then I'll go ahead and adjust the rankings, start to, position, take all the Atlanta Falcons and Jacksonville Jaguars players out. And for the remaining, 3.5 hours that will be on stream answering questions so that we are ready to go for Week 4. Outside of that, a couple reminders. At the end of today's video, I'll also be putting together some Underdog Pick'ems slips for this upcoming weekend's games. For those of you guys who have yet to check out Underdog Fantasy, be sure to go ahead, travel down to the description while you're clicking the like button, of course, subscribing to the channel, click on the link, travel over to their website, and if you have not yet already, use code Andrew, make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, because not only are you going to get a first-time deposit match up to $500, you're also going to get my rankings sent to you individually from me to your email every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings consist of by position, by tier, flex rankings, half PPR, full PPR, all encompassing. So regardless of what you're doing on Sundays for the remainder of the season, you have an advantage upon your league mates every single Sunday morning. So be sure to go ahead, check out the eligibility to the right side of the screen based on your current location, draft responsibly via Underdog Fantasy, and let's put together some pick'em slips and win for this upcoming weekend. Thank you for the support. All right, let's talk about the past. In 2022, from weeks 1 through 3, these running backs and these wide receivers had incredible starts to their seasons. James Robinson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Cordero Patterson, Khalil Herbert. All 4 of those running backs were top 8 in a half PPR scoring format from weeks 1 through 3 of the 2022 season. And obviously, as the remainder of the season went on, they began to fizzle out. And that's what we want to try to avoid. We want to sell high on a lot of prospects, because if in fact we're going to have this year's James Robinson or Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we have to be very careful, because as you guys can tell, even though they started extremely hot to begin the season, these running backs finished as RB 47, 46, 30, and 39, which in the grand scheme didn't really contribute to our overall upside for the remainder of the season. Now, when we look at the wide receiver position and who started off hot early last season, Curtis Samuel, Drake London, Marquise Hollywood Brown, Michael Thomas, Devin Duvernay. Now, in a lot of these scenarios, like for example, Michael Thomas dealt with an injury. Marquise Hollywood Brown also went to the injured reserve. There are some situations here that we had players unfortunately drop off because of injuries. But in a lot of these other scenarios, like Curtis Samuel, Drake London, Devin Duvernay, they just fell off because eventually they couldn't continue with that potential touchdown upside. The targets began to diminish, and all of that certainly did not help for the remainder of the season. And when we go ahead and talk about other positions, perhaps tight ends or quarterbacks to begin the 2022 year, Tyler Conklin, Gerald Everett, Will Disley, Carson Wentz, these were all players that were ranked very highly to start last season, but eventually fizzled out. So when we look at what is going on right now in 2023, at the running back position, we have Raheem Mostert as the RB1 overall, Devon Achane as the RB6 off of one singular incredible performance, Kyron Williams as RB7, and Zach Moss as RB13. These are potential sell-high candidates, to say the very least. Now, we'll talk about Zach Moss in more detail as we continue, but I certainly do believe, like, if I'm going to sell a running back and I have Raheem Mostert, I'm going to try to sell him for as much as I possibly can, because there are going to be people in your league who desperately need a running back, who are dealing with injuries, lost Nick Chubb thus far this season, or perhaps have lost Nick Chubb and J.K. Dobbins, and they're struggling enough to the point where they're willing to give anything for a running back of Raheem Mostert's overall upside that he has demonstrated thus far this season, and perhaps isn't going to be able to maintain that for the remainder of the year. Now, at the wide receiver position, wide receivers like Puka Nacua, Adam Thielen, Tank Dell, all in the top 12 of their current positional rankings, which is ridiculous to say the very least. Tutu Atwell, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, and Tutu Atwell. Once, in fact, we get a full healthy Cooper Kupp returning, their overall upside is going to diminish. That is a given. And even though the Los Angeles Rams run 11 personnel, the second most amongst all teams thus far this season in terms of overall snap counts, and we'll see Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell on the field for the remainder of the season, they're still not going to see as much target upside when Cooper Kupp is available, garnering himself 15 to 12 targets every single week. Nonetheless, these are some other wide receivers that you might want to be looking at as potential sell-high candidates going forward. We also have tight ends. Sam Laporta is a keep. Anytime you can find yourself a gem like Sam Laporta, you'll keep him. But Hunter Henry, obviously touchdown upside. Donald Parham, touchdown upside. The volatility of touchdowns certainly makes it difficult to roster and trust these kind of players. And even players like Jordan Love. I mean, he's not the Carson Wentz of this year, but there's a chance that he could be. There's some times where thus far this season he has struggled heavily, but eventually the garbage time and the garbage man comes along to save the day. All right. Now, with this all mentioned, let's go ahead and let's transition into talking about some trade targets for this upcoming season, specifically buy low for week 4 before they end up finding their footing and taking off for the remainder of the season. Beginning with our number one, it is Josh Jacobs. We mentioned Josh Jacobs just a couple weeks back because, again, even though Josh Jacobs is currently considered the number 28 overall running back in fantasy football with 25 total points in 3 weeks of overall contributions, if you go back to 2022, Josh Jacobs from weeks 1 through 3 was identically RB28 and had only 28.6 fantasy points contributed. Let's not forget, this was the running back who finished RB3 overall in 2022 and was a player that was in fantasy football MVP because of his overall efforts. And yet he is being slept on once again, despite the fact he has started slow for another consecutive year. But when you compare his 2022 campaign to 2023, already thus far this season, he has 55 total touches compared to last season's 49 total touches. He is on pace, if not better, going into the week 4. And in my opinion, with his upcoming schedule looking like the Los Angeles Chargers, Green Bay Packers, New England Patriots, Chicago Bears, Detroit Lions, and New York Giants, outside of the Detroit Lions matchup, which is going to be tough in terms of running the ball, everything is going to be extremely advantageous now that he's gone ahead and found his footing. Again, we have to remember, Josh Jacobs did not participate in any of the overall training camp, practices. He was a guy that was holding out and wanted a new contract and eventually got that. And now that we have himself kind of with 3 weeks of experience under his belt, eventually he's going to have those breakout games. And when he does, we want to have him on roster because we know what kind of potential upside he can present already throughout his entire career. Like I've mentioned all summer, and quite frankly, like I've mentioned over the last couple summers, Josh Jacobs has always finished as a top 12 running back in fantasy football when healthy. When we go back to 2019, prior to his injury, was a top 12 candidate at the running back position. In 2020, he was top 12, didn't miss a singular game. The year after that, in 2021, missed 3 games early in the year with a turf toe. Once he returned, was top 12 in that capacity. And of course, last year was an unstoppable force, averaging 17 fantasy points per game and was the RB3 overall. I truly do believe in an offense that, of course, wants to run the ball with Josh McDaniels and the influences that he has, on top of the fact that this is a contract which is a 1-year deal and they want to run Josh Jacobs into the ground and get as much as they can get out of him, kind of squeeze everything out of his overall production, I expect Josh Jacobs to get back on track very soon and hopefully will be on your rosters once he finds his footing and puts up those 20-point monster games. Moving on to our next prospect, we have CeeDee Lamb. Again, CeeDee Lamb thus far this season is currently the number 22 overall wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format with 37.7 fantasy points. If you go back to 2022, the first 3 weeks of the season, he was the number 28 overall wide receiver and had only 34 fantasy points. Very close overall production. The difference is 3.5 overall fantasy points in a half PPR and 6 overall ranks. Ultimately, CeeDee Lamb has not lived up to his overall expectations. He only has 19 receptions for 273 receiving yards and not a singular touchdown. And you got to remember, last year he had 9 receiving touchdowns, and throughout his entire career with Dak Prescott has progressively got more and more touchdowns every year. And the expectation for 2023 is still double digits for the touchdown conversation. Therefore, for the remainder of the year, we could very easily see CeeDee Lamb take that huge jump. You got to remember, this is a man that finished as the number 6 overall wide receiver last season in a half PPR scoring format. And because of the overall situations that this offense has been in, week 1 was a complete blowout. Didn't need the services of CeeDee Lamb to find success. In week 2, obviously he played well. In week 3, wasn't really the best overall offensive showing. In fact, specifically in the last 2 weeks, the Dallas Cowboys, they are 3 for 11 in the red zone and 2 for 7 in goal-to-go situations, haven't been able to score touchdowns. And once they go ahead and they begin to find themselves in a more successful form, the Dallas Cowboys, and specifically CeeDee Lamb, is going to be an incredible player. Thus far this season, he only has 24 total targets in 3 weeks, in comparison to the season prior, where he had 34 targets in the first 3 games. His target counts are going to go up, and if and when they do, taking on the New England Patriots, 49ers, Chargers, Rams, Philadelphia Eagles, New England Patriots in his next 6 games, that is an extremely advantageous strength of schedule going forward. I'm expecting a lot of upside for CeeDee Lamb in the coming weeks. All right, let's move on to Jaylen Waddle. Now, even though the Dolphins put up 70 points without the services of Jaylen Waddle, we all know how much talent this team has. They are the #1 offense in the National Football League, and when Tua Tagovailoa is starting off games 16 for 16 passing, you know that you want to have any piece that is associated with this offense. And if you have the potential of going after a player that has missed week 3, has only put up 20 fantasy points, and is currently considered the number 57 overall wide receiver, might as well go after him. You got to remember, this time last year, Jaylen Waddle was the number 3 overall wide receiver with 63 total fantasy points, compared to right now, again, with only 20 fantasy points. He had himself a huge overall, boost of a week this time last year against the Baltimore Ravens, where he had that monster game. And eventually, we're going to find that with Jaylen Waddle this year, when teams are trying to, of course, focus on stopping Tyreek Hill and, of course, try to stop the incredibly potent running game of the Miami Dolphins. Throughout the entirety of last season, they were nothing even close to what they are in terms of current form of running the ball. Their offensive line is playing incredibly well. Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Jeff Wilson Jr., they have a 3-headed monster that is absolutely going to torch defenses. So while everyone's focusing on those other pieces, by all means, we know that Jaylen Waddle is potentially in line for a huge rest of season boost, considering his association with this offense and Tua Tagovailoa. Let's not forget, in the last 14 games that Jaylen Waddle has played with Tua Tagovailoa, he has been able to put up 12 games of 65 or more receiving yards and 9 games of 85 or more receiving yards. The expectation for Jaylen Waddle for the remainder of the season is to go ahead and once again reclaim a top 12 standing at the position. Even though he's got a lot of room to make up, he is a wide receiver that is certainly capable of having these explosive games within this offense. The next player I wanted to mention is Garrett Wilson. This may be a surprise as a buy low candidate, primarily because he has not played well thus far this season due to the absence of Aaron Rodgers. But let me go ahead and potentially try to string and weave a narrative as to what I anticipate to see for the remainder of the season for the New York Jets offense. They most recently signed Trevor Siemian. And the reason why that is extremely important is because eventually Zack Wilson is going to be replaced. It's not going to be this week. I mean, it could be at halftime for all we know. But eventually, Garrett Wilson will have Trevor Siemian as his starting quarterback. And if and when he does, you got to remember, when we go back to last season, Garrett Wilson with any other quarterback not named Zack Wilson, whether it was Joe Flacco or Mike White, was averaging 14.23 fantasy points per game in the 8 games in which he played with those quarterbacks. All we truly need is a competent quarterback, and I do believe Trevor Siemian can present that for us and for the fantasy value of Garrett Wilson. Thus far this season, Garrett Wilson is wide receiver 31. This time last year, he was wide receiver 15. He's producing far less than his overall expectations because of what we associated him with Aaron Rodgers. But again, he doesn't need Aaron Rodgers. All he needs is a kind of competent quarterback that is not afraid of throwing the ball and can move the chains on a consistent basis. And I think Trevor Siemian can provide that and allow Garrett Wilson to get to that top 24 value at the wide receiver position. Therefore, I'm going after him because not only can you get him at his potential cheapest value at this current moment in time, if you let the Kansas City Chiefs go by us, he puts up another 5-point dud week. There's an even better chance of you being able to steal him off somebody's roster as they're just trying to hand him out for free, considering just how bad Zack Wilson is and the fact that he's not really helping Garrett Wilson in many of these scenarios. Moving on to the next wide receiver I wanted to mention, it is Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley in week 1 demonstrated that he is a very good wide receiver. 20 fantasy points, 8 catches on 11 targets, 101 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown. Honestly, should have had 2 receiving touchdowns if it wasn't for the fact that he barely stepped out of bounds on the sideline while evading a tackle. Nonetheless, in the last 2 weeks, 15 targets, 5 catches, 72 receiving yards, and quite literally only 9.7 fantasy points. The offense for the Jacksonville Jaguars have been far less than productive. In the last 2 weeks, put up 17 points and 9 points as an offense. These are not numbers that we typically see from the Jacksonville Jaguars. The expectation going into the season was that Trevor Lawrence was going to take a huge step forward, which he has yet to do so, and that Calvin Ridley will, of course, be helping him take that huge step forward as the primary number 1 wide receiver of this team. And even though he still has maintained the number 1 wide receiver standing within this overall team, it's purely just a matter of can Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson set themselves up for success for the remainder of the year. I believe they'll be able to do so, even though they have started off slowly. As an offense, they'll eventually find their footing, and when they do, Calvin Ridley will demonstrate, similar to week 1, that he has extremely high upside within this offense going forward. At this current moment in time, Calvin Ridley only has 29.8 fantasy points and a half PPR, is considered the wide receiver 40 overall. it's a very good opportunity right now to go ahead, trade for him before he has this huge revenge game against the Atlanta Falcons in London. The final player I wanted to mention in specific is Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is still on the PUP list, which means that he could potentially return in week 5, but time will tell. He is still dealing with that injury, and again, you got to remember just how great of a player Jonathan Taylor is. Jonathan Taylor, since week 13 of the 2020 season, has averaged 19.03 fantasy points per game and has scored a total of 32 touchdowns in the last 32 games that he has played. Jonathan Taylor is an incredible prospect, and anytime you give him opportunity, 18 or more touches, averaging 20.06 fantasy points per game, and on top of that, anytime he has played 50 or more % of the offensive snaps from 2020 through 2022, is averaging 19.21 fantasy points per game in the last 33 games he has played. These are incredible numbers. And when you take into account the fact that Zack is getting himself 22 touches in week 2 and 32 touches in week 3, putting up 18.7 and 21.5 fantasy points, the potency of the running game of the Indianapolis Colts was nothing even close to this last year. Imagine what you do if you supplant Zack and we insert a guy like Jonathan Taylor, his skill, his upside within this lineup. The sky is the limit within this overall offensive attack. But the question is Jonathan Taylor going to be a Colt this year? Over the course of this entire offseason, and most recently, of course, this week, we have heard rumors about Jonathan Taylor still not wanting to play for the Indianapolis Colts. A couple of the reports and rumors have been that teams like the Dolphins, Packers, Chiefs, Commanders, Bills, Rams, and Steelers have reached out to the Indianapolis Colts in order to kind of see what they can do to get Jonathan Taylor on roster. There is a potential in which Jonathan Taylor could still be traded to a team. That's not out of the realm of possibility. And if he does, regardless of whether you traded for him or not, he's still going to have value because of what he is at the running back position. There are very few running backs in the National Football League that have as much talent, not only on the ground, but through the air as Jonathan Taylor. And that's why he wants to get paid. So my suggestion is to go out, trade for Jonathan Taylor. If in fact you're in a position where he stays within the Colts organization and he supplants Zack, fantastic, he'll be great. If he gets traded, fantastic, he's still going to be great. For those of you who have Zack, keep this in mind. The only way that this could go sour is if Jonathan Taylor stays with the Indianapolis Colts and plays. And it's looking like there's a higher likelihood that he won't. And if he doesn't, for those of you who have Zack, it may not be a sell high scenario. It may be a situation where you go out and you trade for Jonathan Taylor and you have, regardless of what happens, the starting running back of the Indianapolis Colts. In best case scenario, win-win, Jonathan Taylor gets traded and you have 2 starting running backs for the remainder of the season that are honestly playing extremely well. All right, that's going to cover it in terms of potential trade options, buy low candidates going into week 4. Let me know down in the comment section a couple of the trades that you guys will be conducting this weekend and or have already conducted. I'll go ahead and give you guys my thought process regarding those. We're going to go ahead and now transition into talking about some Underdog Pick'ems for this weekend. A couple reminders before we do so. For those of you who haven't checked out the 1.01 brand, again, a lot of you have, and I cannot thank you guys enough for continuing to show support in regards to the merch. Again, representing the channel, representing greetings and salutations. Thank you very much for all of you who have done so. To show my appreciation, we're making shipping free for the remainder of the season, so you guys can go ahead, get yourself the 1.01 brand merch, represent the channel with high quality, comfortable, and stylish clothing for your most stressful of upcoming fantasy football Sundays. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, let's get into talking about some Underdog Pick'ems, shall we? To begin, I wanted to go ahead and review some of the overall Pick'em slips that I put together last week. Some of them did not go well. Some of them did. And I just wanted to go ahead and review these really quickly. This was for Monday of this last week. Obviously, I came up just, 7 yards short of potentially hitting this one. Where's another one? We had this one that luckily hit for us. Again, this is one that we all knew was potentially going to hit, considering all these players were due for big games and potentially once again will be due for those in week 4. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We had a huge flop here. As you can see, Gibbs, Groupie. I mean, this was a kicker's disaster. I mean, literally a kicker's disaster. Who would have guessed that the Dolphins were going to score 70 and not a single field goal, huh? Anyway, and then we had a couple wide receiver plays. I mean, this was the highest potential scoring game based on Vegas numbers. Obviously, this one hit was an incredible game for us. We had, a couple more here that, man, they could have hit. Literally, who would have thought that Nico Collins, of all wide receivers, would completely crack under the pressure and not get himself more than 4 receptions within this given week? Obviously, killed it. Could have had myself a nice $200 payday in that overall field, but no problem. And then we have this. We have the beautiful TJ Hawkinson, CJ Stroud, Travis Etienne that we put together on this episode last week, or on the Friday episode of last week that played well for us. And potentially we'll be going after a player like TJ Hawkinson once again today. But either way, just wanted to go ahead and show those. Let's go ahead and let's put together some pick'em slips and potentially find some success for the given week. So as you guys can see to the right side of the screen at this current moment in time, this upcoming weekend, they have the 100K Sunday play All you got to do is put Dameon Pierce into a pick'em slip, and you have a chance of winning $10,000. 10 lucky winners will win 10K this upcoming weekend. Just put them in a pick'em slip, and you're good to go. Of course, check out the rules via Underdog Fantasy regarding that overall promotion, but it's a fantastic play. Now, let's go ahead and let's talk about players that I honestly find are quite frankly being disrespected in terms of the overall numbers that they are being associated with via Underdog Fantasy. Let's go ahead and let's scroll a little bit. Now, there's a lot of potential players here via Underdog Fantasy, so you can go ahead potentially put together some pick'em slips with defensive players. You can pick higher or lower. It's a very easy game. All you got to go ahead and do is just figure out what statistic you think these players are capable of. We talked about Jaylen Waddle just a moment ago. Specifically, the statistic that I mentioned just moments ago was that in the last 14 games with Tua Tagovailoa, Jaylen Waddle has put up 65 or more receiving yards in 12 out of the last 14 games. His current number sits at 60.5 receiving yards. That is an automatic hire. I'll probably put that together within a pick'em slip 100 times this weekend because I truly do think that is a very easy number for him to accomplish, especially going up against the Buffalo Bills, which should be a higher scoring event between these two teams. Now, the next player that I really liked was on the other side of this matchup, specifically is Josh Allen. For some reason, they currently have his passing attempts number at 35.5. I think this may be a glitch. Get it while you can, because in the last 3 games that he has taken on the Miami Dolphins in 2022, whether it was regular season or the NFL playoffs, his passing attempt total 39, 40, and 63. This game is going to be a shootout between these two teams. Josh Allen will absolutely have to air that out in order to find success. I believe 35.5 passing attempts is not enough. We're taking the higher on that within this overall pick'em slip. We go ahead and we scroll down to find another player that we specifically like every single week because, I mean, Justin Jefferson just keeps finding himself a lot of success. And the fact of the matter is, they're currently listing him at 90. Oh, okay. Prior to the video, it was 98.5 receiving yards. Currently now set at 100.5. We're still taking the higher on that. The reason why, let me go ahead and read the statistic. In 8 of the last 10 regular season games that Justin Jefferson has participated in which he has himself over 50% of the offensive snaps, he's had a base minimum of 12 targets, 7 overall receptions, and 115 receiving yards. That's 80% of the time he is surpassing 115 receiving yards. 100.5, I'll take that any day of the week. Now, another player that we specifically like is in regards to the New Orleans Saints taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. My assumption is that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers run-stop defense is going to play well, and it's going to force someone like, unfortunately, Rachaad White not to play so well, but if you want to go ahead and maybe take the lower on this number, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. I mean, Rachaad White has struggled against the Minnesota Vikings and Philadelphia Eagles, but I don't typically like to, hope for failures from our fantasy prospects. I want to hope that everyone can produce more than their overall potential. So let's go ahead and let's talk about someone that is going to surpass their potential. Both Chris Olave and Michael Thomas. Both these players set at 5.5 and 4.5 receptions. Like I mentioned earlier this week, with Jameis Winston in the lineup, they're going to find themselves a lot of passing opportunities, specifically in the game this last week against the Green Bay Packers. As soon as Jameis Winston came into the game and played, 38% of the overall offensive snaps, he targeted Chris Olave 5 times for 3 receptions and 46 receiving yards. He targeted Michael Thomas 7 times for 6 receptions and 50 receiving yards in only 38% of the overall offensive snaps that they played. And they were able to, get themselves that heavy of a volume of overall passing attempts. So in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, okay, if we go back to last season, 2022, weeks 1 through 3, when Jameis Winston was the starting quarterback of this team, and we had Chris Olave and Michael Thomas was able to surpass 4.5 receiving yards in every single one of those games. Additionally, Chris Olave was able to accomplish that in 2 of his last 3 games with Jameis Winston, primarily because he was a rookie last year. Week 1, wasn't really finding himself much of a snap count share, but in weeks 2 and 3 was able to have himself monster games while being easily able to surpass 5.5 receptions. So we'll take higher on, that's not it. We'll take higher on both these numbers. This is 5 players. Again, this is Jaylen Waddle, Josh Allen, Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, and Michael Thomas. We'll put together a pick'em slip for that going into this upcoming weekend, and then we'll move on to some other players. Now, other players that I specifically liked going into this upcoming weekend that I'm once again going to put in line with Josh Allen and Jaylen Waddle because those are the 2 that I'm most confident with. We currently have Jake Moody of the San Francisco 49ers. Again, the San Francisco 49ers take on the Arizona Cardinals. The expectation is the Cardinals won't be able to stop this offense. And even if they do, it'll open up opportunity for Jake Moody to perhaps kick some field goals. And when he does, by all means, he will find himself scoring a lot of points. Prior to me beginning recording this video, he was set at 1.5 field goals. This guy's made 3 field goals in each of the last 3 weeks. I was going to suggest taking higher than 1.5 field goals made. Unfortunately, it is not available here. 8 total points again, is going to be a little bit sketchier, but again, he's made 3 field goals in each of the last 3 weeks. I'm going to go ahead and still take higher on this overall number. My expectation is that this team is going to score a lot of points, and Jake Moody, alongside of him, will be able to do so as well. Let's go ahead and move on, and let's talk about the Monday Night Football game. Kenneth Walker, for some reason, is being massively slept on in one of the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. Taking on, specifically, this defense, the New York Giants have allowed 19.67 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs in terms of running back rushing statistics alone over the course of the last 3 weeks. That's the 3rd best matchup at the running back position, while they're also allowing 4.17 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. My expectation is that he'll be able to crush 62.5 rushing yards. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go ahead and scroll very much so to the top and put him in a slip with, where are my favorites? Where are those Bills players? Again, that game, the Bills versus Dolphins game, is, according to Vegas, in terms of the total number, the highest implicated scoring game within the given week. So the expectation is that we're going to find ourselves a lot of potential within these players going higher on their overall number. So we'll take Mr. Josh Allen there, and we'll take Jaylen Waddle here, and we'll go ahead and put together another pick'em slip. Actually, you know what? While I'm at it, I'm going to go back down, and I'm going to throw Mr. Where's TJ Hawkinson? All right, I went ahead and I pulled up the game logs for TJ Hawkinson. We're going to go ahead and take the higher on his overall receptions just to make this a 5-leg, overall pick'em slip. In the last, goodness gracious, in the last couple regular season games in which he's played 50% or more of the offensive snaps, 8 catches, 7 catches, 8 catches, 10 catches, 7, 13. What is that? That's 6 of the last 6 games in which he's played for this organization, has been able to surpass 7 or more receptions. By all means, TJ Hawkinson, a huge part of this offense, coming off of another consecutive week of 8 or more targets. By all means, TJ Hawkinson will take the higher on that. We'll close out today's episode by putting together this pick'em slip. Be sure to go ahead, check out Underdog Fantasy at this current moment in time. Put together some pick'em slips, whether you're fading, following, all of that. Get my rankings for this upcoming Sunday. Do not forget, I'll be live streaming tomorrow and on Sunday morning. And until then, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.